Christianity has given us. But first we need to address is the fact that there have been those who claim to be followers of Christ who have committed very evil and terrible acts, and claiming to do so for the benefit of Christ and his kingdom. This needs to be addressed and condemned for what it is, evil people committing evil acts. But the mistake of new atheists is to attribute the cause of this evil to Christianity, as this just assumes these atrocious acts had to come from Christianity, while discounting other factors that could have really caused this. This is actually known as an attribution error, and one social psychologist has directly called out the new atheist movement for committing this error. This would be the same as if I said atheism was the only thing which caused Stalin and Mao to become murdering savage dictators. Shouldn't we look at all the factors that turned them to evil, instead of just saying their belief about God made them murder millions of people? This whole argument breaks down when we note that Jesus taught love and peace instead of war and torture. It was Soren Kierkegaard that noted that Christendom's violence was not Christian, for the very simple reason that it was dramatically opposed to what Christ taught. Jesus taught to turn the other cheek, love your enemies, and pray for those who persecute you. When the fighting starts, instead of participating, flee to the mountains. It was Paul that taught Christians should live peaceful lives and care for their families, and to live in peace with all men. As they say in Misreading Scripture with Western Eyes, we need to stop writing Scripture on the side of bombs. We are rather confident such a practice doesn't meet the WWJD criteria. Christians should echo the psalmist, "Too long have I lived in among those who hate peace. I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war." Any person who claims to follow Christ, yet wages war in his name, is clearly not following his teachings, but a twisted, distorted view of Christianity, completely opposite of what it is supposed to be. If that is the case, then those who claim to be killing in the name of Christ could not have gotten it from the teachings of Christ. As John Lennox says, new atheists inexcusably confuse the evils of renegade Christendom with the teachings of Christ, and thus think that the violence is part and parcel of Christian faith, whereas the Christian faith itself repudiates violence and religious exploitation. The new atheist ought to be applauding Christ, not condemning him. Now, ironically,
you serious?
And also on the Crusades and the history of the Crusades. A lot of people will talk a lot about the Crusades without really knowing much about what they were about, what was going on. So let's get into some of this. So first of all, I just want to point out that Christianity is not a pacifist religion. It is not now. It has never been. It was not founded as a pacifist religion by Jesus. And this is pretty clear when you look into the Gospels. I mean, when you take the Bible as a whole, people will have this idea that Christianity is about, live and let live. Don't judge anybody. Be nice to people. Don't say anything that would offend somebody. Jesus would never judge somebody for having a different religious point of view. This is almost the idea you get from people. Look at Jesus in the Gospels, what he was doing. He was founding a religion. He was founding a movement that he himself predicted would bring conflict to the world. He said, I come not to bring peace, but a sword. And of course, what he was talking about there, he's not necessarily talking about he's literally going to lead an army. His very coming and setting up this new religion is going to create conflict between people. He even says, a conflict within families. And that Christians, they are to face that and deal with that. It might even be in a military situation. In some instances, it might be more metaphorical, but this is something that Christians are going to have to face, and that they're not supposed to just necessarily back down from conflict. There is an instance in the Gospels where Jesus himself uses force. He uses violence, and that, of course, is the famous example in the temple in Jerusalem. There are men who have come in and they have set up places to sell things, money changers. Jesus is very offended by this because they have violated this sacred space. He picks up a whip and drives these people out of the temple in Jerusalem, using violence. Again, I'm emphasizing this because in a way, this reflects what would be the mission of the Crusades. The Crusades, the first Crusade is launched. It's about going to Jerusalem and driving evildoers from Jerusalem because they are violating the sacred space of the Holy Sepulchre. This is the way it was viewed by medieval Latin Christians. They viewed this as they were purifying these holy places of evildoers. So similar to what Jesus was doing here. It's interesting that this is the example of Jesus himself using violence. And this kind of thing was very powerful for medieval Christians when they were, looking to their faith for inspiration for their own activities and their own actions. The Gospel of Luke famously affirms the power of the Roman state, or doesn't condemn it, presents it as though a Christian does not have to be in rebellion against the Roman secular authorities to be a Christian. So from the beginning, there's this idea that state power, secular non-religious power, can have legitimacy. And this has an impact on Christian history. Throughout Christian history, we have these two forces. We have secular authority like the king, and then we have the church, the religious authority, and they exist side by side. Ideally, they're supposed to exist in harmony, but this goes back to the Gospels and the fact that this message is there, that this is appropriate. It's different than other religions, like, say, for example, Islam, where the state authority and the religious authority are joined together. And of course, state power implies the use of force. So, if state power exists, then that necessitates the reality that physical force is being used. Jesus did not denounce the profession of the soldier. He praises the faith of the Roman centurion. He heals his servant. He does not tell him to give up his profession. We have something similar with John the Baptist. He's asked by some soldiers, well, what should we do? He doesn't tell them, lay down your arms, give up your profession, because, we're pacifists. He says, be content with your pay and don't commit injustices against the common people. So he does not denounce the profession of the soldier, the profession of the warrior. He simply tells them not to be exploitative. And again, this will have an impact on Christian teaching about the state. The idea is that legitimate state authority is not exploitative. If we're going to talk about the Crusades, I also think it's important that we look at the Old Testament. A lot of people don't realize how intensely biblical medieval Christianity was. People have this idea that Christians didn't know anything about the Bible until the Reformation. This is absolute nonsense. Ordinary Christians had a very deep sense of the Bible and the stories in the Bible. Although a lot of people were not literate in the Middle Ages, the Bible and the stories in it were widely known. They were known through the artwork in the churches. They were known through dramatizations that were put on in medieval villages. This was a common form of entertainment, of festivity, is that the locals in a community would put on some sort of play, some sort of drama, and oftentimes stories from the Bible were an obvious choice for this, and this was a favorite topic for these plays. So people knew what was in the Bible, and they had a deep sense of it. And medieval Western Christians identified deeply with these Old Testament stories of God leading the Israelites into battle against evildoers. So they saw themselves as God's chosen people. In fact, oftentimes, you look at these medieval chronicles of the Crusades, and they describe their enemies as the Gentiles. We think of Gentiles as being people who aren't part of the Jewish community nowadays, but for medieval Christians, the term Gentile would have been used for their Saracen opponents, for whoever they were fighting in the Crusades. They really, these stories of like Joshua and these various leaders from the Old Testament, this resonated very deeply with, medieval Latin Christians. They, viewed their own holy war as, going into battle against God's enemies. They equated this with these great Old Testament epics. If you look at a lot of medieval chronicles,